So this is a controlled test of September 2023, and this is a controlled test from the province of Limpopo. So we are going to start on the instructions and information, whereby section A is compulsory, which means we have to answer all the questions that we have in section A. Then going to section B, you have to answer any one question on section B, and then we take note that we have to answer only one, that is from section B. Then section C, you answer one question again from this section. So remember, section C is the essay part. So we have to choose one of the two questions that are there. And of course, section B, there are two questions that are also there, and you choose one. Then on the first part, that is on section A, we are going to start with the first question. This is the multiple choice section, whereby it reads: a first group of people who lived in the southern and western parts of Africa. So these are the options that we have. That is from A to D, whereby we have got Khoisan, African tribes, Europeans, Arabs. So the correct response that we had according to what we have there is the Khoisan, which is A. Then we have number two. Number two reads: a situation when people move from place to place for water, food, or pasta is known as. Of course, the answer is nomadic. We have nomadic. See. Number three, the evolution over time of the population profile of a country or region. The correct response that we have there is a B, which is the demographic cycle. So remember, when we are looking at the demographic cycle, it is a transition which comes as a theory in the social sciences, referring to the historical shift from high birth rates and high death rates, and also low death rates. It is high birth rates and then high death rates and low death rates in societies. Obviously, this is transferring as societies attain more technology and also attain education and economic development. So basically, this is the description that we have in terms of demographic cycle. So moving on to question four: situation when people are between jobs or seeking for a job for the first time. So obviously, according to the responses that we have, you would see that we have uh, unemployment. So we have D as our answer. The number five, bringing parties together and getting them to agree on a certain course of action is conciliation. So we have conciliation C. So on the description of a conciliation, it is basically an alternative dispute resolution process. So basically, it's a dispute resolution process whereby the parties to a dispute rely on a third party known as the conciliator to assist in solving their dispute. So whenever a third party is involved, which we call the conciliator, it is the conciliation. So this is the last part that we have in terms of our multiple choice section with a total of 10 marks. So we move on to the next section, which is 1.2, which is choose a description from column B that matches the item in column A. Write only the letter I to A to I next to the question numbers. In terms of the first one, we've got arbitration. But arbitration basically is a formal method of dispute resolution involving a third party, which is neutral, who makes a binding decision. So basically, what we are saying is that the third party, which is neutral, renders the decision in the form of an arbitration award. So, but basically, at the end of it, you would see that an arbitration is a legal binding. It is a legal binding on both sides and enforceable in the law of courts. So that is an arbitration. So within that context, we check which description do matches that in terms of arbitration. So we have G, which is saying the hearing and determination of a dispute by an impartial referee. So the impartial referee is the third party that is not taking sides. So we have G as our answer on 1.2.1. So moving on to the second part, we have a mechanism. So the match on mechanism is when human labor is replaced with a machinery. So that is a mechanism. So we have D. So moving on to overpopulation. So on overpopulation, we check again. On E, it is an increase in population due to an increase in immigration. Can also be overpopulation. So we have our answer is E. So moving on to the next part, we have got migration. So number 4 is migration. Then we check again which one do matches migration. But when we have the element of moving from one country to the other. So if you go to A, moving from one country to another. So we have A as the correct response. Then we've got globalization. Which one do matches globalization? You see that if you look at C, the worldwide integration of markets and production describes a globalization. So moving on to the next part, which is a specialization. So on specialization, with B, when business focus on producing a limited range of goods and services is the best description of specialization that we have. So this becomes the last part that we have on matching words. Then we'll go to the next part, which is now 1.3, which we have to give one term for each of the following descriptions. So we've got movement of people from rural areas to towns or cities. So basically, this is urbanization. This is urbanization. Then we move on to a process of exchanging goods and services for each other in the absence of money. This is barter trade. Then moving on to the next part, whereby we now have 1.3.3 consists of those employed and those not employed. So we are looking at the economically active population. So we are looking at economically active population. Moving on to a question 4, an organization that protects and fights for the rights of employees. It is the labor union. So basically, that's what we have on our section A. In our section A, has a total of 20 marks. So moving on to the next part, which is now question 2. It reads, answer the following questions, whereby 2.1.1, name and 2 rights of workers in the workplace. We have got 2 marks. So remember, the rights that we can have in the workplace is, for example, every employee has the right to form and join an employee's organization. That is also from the side of the employer. An employer also can join any employer organization. So those are some of the rights that we can talk about. We can also talk about right to fair labor practices. Everyone has the right to a fair labor practices. So we have a list of those as mentioned in our answer section. We have the first one is saying everyone has the right to fair labor practices. Every worker has the right to form and join a trade union, and also every worker has the right to participate in the activities and programs of a trade union and to strike. So these are some of the points that we can include. We've got further points that we also have within the context of the question. So next question reads, briefly explain the law of demand for labor, which is the higher the price of labor is, the lower the demand for such labor will be. So basically, we have 2 variables that are there that are compared in terms of the law of demand, which is the price is a variable, and also we have the demand, the quantity of demand, obviously, is a variable. But we see that there is a negative relationship that exists between the two. That is, when price increases, we are going to see demand decreasing. Then the opposite is true. And to go to the next point, the lower the price of labor, is, the higher the demand for such labor will be. So basically, that's what we have between the relationship that exists between the price and the demand. So moving on to the next part that we have. So on the next question that is now our question 2.2, it will study the graph below and answer the questions that follow. So in terms of the graph that is given, we are given the graph of labor market. So we see that we have got the supply of labor and the demand of labor. And then, of course, we have got the equilibrium point as indicated at the intersection point at this point. So this is what we have. Then beneath that now we have quantity of labor, we have it as on the horizontal axis, and then we've got wage level on the vertical axis. So first question reads, identify the equilibrium wage rate. So equilibrium wage rate basically is the intersection point that we have of the supply of labor curve and then the demand of labor curve. And then we've got the intersection at A. So obviously now the question now wants the equilibrium wage rate, of which wage rate we are having wage rate on the vertical axis. So basically this 500 rands becomes the equilibrium wage rate. So we move on to the next question from the graph. What would the labor surplus be? So labor surplus, obviously, we are going to have labor surplus if the price goes above the equilibrium wage rate. So if you look at the wage rate now above the equilibrium wage rate, we see that 600 rands is above 500. So when the wage rate is 600, we are going to see the demand being at B, and then we have the supply at C. So basically, we see that C is greater than B in terms of the quantity. So within that context now, you can see that there is a surplus that is going to be created with the difference that is going to exist between C and B, which is going to be indicated by the difference between 200 and 100. So if you say 200 minus 100, you get the surplus. So basically, this is again how it is illustrated in our answer section. So as we see that, you see 200 minus 100, then you get your 100, as indicated in this part. So we'll move on to the next part of our question. The question reads, briefly describe the term labor union, which is an organization that protects and fights for the rights of employees. Then we go to 2.2.4. What will be the impact on the market if the size of the population increases? So obviously, if the size if the size of the population increases, the supply curve will shift to the right as the size of the labor force is increased. There will be greater demand for labor. There will be greater demand for labor, and also goods or services and for labor, which is goods or services. So basically, that's the scenario that we have if the size of the population increases. So we go to the next part whereby we have 2.2.5, which reads, how is arbitration used to solve labor disputes? So we have described arbitration as a formal method of dispute resolution, which obviously involves a third party which is neutral, which makes which enforces the binding decision. So with that now, our question reads, how is arbitration used to solve labor disputes? So it is that trade unions negotiate with employers on behalf of members to improve wages and benefits such as improved pensions and medical benefits, working conditions, health and safety conditions. So these are the points that we can include. And then second point, we are saying trade unions work towards reducing any loss of jobs through retrenchment. So this second point that we have on 2.2.5. And then we've got a continuation of also correct points that we can include within the context of the question that we have. Then moving on, we have now 2.3, which is on data response. So 2.3 reads, study the information below and answer the question that follow. So we are given bargaining council information that we need to read through. Then beneath that, you are given 2.3.1, which reads, what does CCMA stand for? So we need to put down what does a CCMA stand for. So you see that it stands for Commission for Conciliation, Mediation, and Arbitration. So that is what CCMA stands for. So moving on to see in terms of that. We have a Commission for Conciliation, Mediation, and Arbitration. So the next question is why, according to the extract, was George's dismissal considered unfair? So if you go back to the extract, you need to find out why, we need to find out why, according to the extract, was George's dismissal considered unfair. So going through the information, you'd see that on this sentence, George says his dismissal was procedurally unfair because the presiding officer who investigated the allegations against him and found him guilty was hired through the same attorneys who conducted the probe. So basically, that's where we have the motivation why George's dismissal considered unfair. So we have that, and then we move on to the next part. Briefly describe the term bargaining council. So, in terms of describing bargaining council, that it is an organization which facilitates the negotiation process. So, it facilitates the negotiation process. Um, Obviously, it will be between the employees and employers. So, that is the bargaining council. So, we have that again. As I explained, other section was saying it is the organization which facilitates a negotiation process between unified employees, in brackets, typical trade unions and employers on matters such as working conditions and wages. So, and then we go to the next question. Why does the labor appeal court have greater powers than a labor court? It's because it can hear appeals against labor court decisions. It can make decisions which are legal and binding. And it can deal directly with matters normally dealt with by the labor court. Then we'll move on to the next question. What would the results of an unsuccessful mediation process be? When conciliation fails, a party may request the CCMA to solve the dispute by arbitration. At an arbitration hearing, a commissioner gives both parties an opportunity to fully state their cases. So this is the last part that we have in terms of 2.3.5. Then on the next point, 2.4, discuss the factors affecting demand for labor in South Africa. So any factor that is going to increase demand for labor or decrease demand for labor are the factors that are being asked by the question. We can talk about performance of the economy, productivity of labor. We are talking about the number of outputs are being produced by each input that is being used. That is productivity of labor. And then we are saying each input, we are talking about each individual worker, how much units are being produced, represents productivity. Then we've got improvements in technology and the supply of other factors. Also can be a factor that we can also include. Then on the 2.5, evaluate the influence of productivity and skills on labor. All businesses employ workers that are able and have the skills to do the required job, and also the better skilled and trained labor, the better the productivity will be. We have got further points that are also correct that we can include in terms of 2.5. We have got a total of 40 marks that we have on question 2. So of course, we can move on to the next question, which is going to be our question 3. So on our question 3, it reads, answer the following questions. So 3.1.1, you have to name L2 objectives of Labor Relations Act. So the objectives that we have of Labor Relations Act is to formulate industrial policy, to act promotes orderly, to promote orderly and collective bargaining. So this is what we have on this point. Then the Act promotes collective bargaining at sectorial level. The Act promotes employee participation in decision making in the workplace. So that is what we have on the objectives of Labor Relations Act. So moving on to the next question that we have. So on the next question, it says, why is the CCMA important? Why is the CCMA important? So you'd see that we have also points that are explaining they resolve disputes through conciliation or arbitration. The CCMA publish information on its activities and guidelines for dispute resolution. So this is what we have in terms of the points that we have on question 3.1.2. In terms of question 3.2, it is start the table and answer the questions that follow. So you are given the table that we have there. We have got some bar graphs that we have inside. So what does this graph depict? We check that it depicts the percentage increase of economic growth. It represents a percentage increase of economic growth. So moving on to the next part at 3.2.2, when did South Africa experience the highest growth rate? So obviously, if you check there on this side, we have a depiction of a decrease in economic growth. But if you look in the upper part, that's why we are having bars that are representing increase in economic growth. But the highest percentage that we have is 6.5 as indicated here, which is in 2007, and it represents the first part of 2007, which is the first quarter of 2007. So first quarter of 2007 is the period for 3.2.2. Then 3.2.3 is briefly describe the term economic growth. So economic growth basically is represented by the increase in economic activity that we have in the economy. We have got more goods that are being produced are being measured from one period to the other. If the goods that are being produced have increased from one period to the other, it indicates that there is economic growth. So in terms of the brief description that we have within the context of this video, is saying economic growth is an increase in the production of economic goods and services compared from one period of time to another. So this is a brief description that we have. Then moving on to the next question, which reads difference between economic growth and economic development now. Growth refers to production, while development refers to the quality of life of an individual or household. So that is what we have. Then 3.2.5. Why might an increase in alcohol consumption lead to an increase in GDP, but a decrease in the standard of living? So remember, GDP will only measure the monetary value of the goods and services, the goods that are being produced in the nation. But when we are not looking at the standard of living, we are looking at the quality of life, which becomes a different issue. So we are saying more people will spend their income on alcohol, and then there will be less to spend on other necessary goods and services. So in that case, it will now have a negative impact in terms of the standard of living. Then the second part, alcohol dependence is also might lead to an increase in the need for medical treatment, placing a greater burden on the state. So this is the points that we have. Then moving on to the next part, which is now on data response, which is 3.3. So 3.3 start the cartoon below and answer the questions that follow. You're given a cartoon of migration, whereby it reads rural urban migration refers to the movement of people from rural areas into cities to live and work. So beneath the cartoon that we are given, it reads what negative effect can migration have on the economy? What negative effects can migration have on the economy? Of course, if there is a migration to cities, it means the cities are going to be overpopulated. So overpopulation is going to be noticed, and then suppression in terms of the services that are there in town are going to be noticed, which is going to be a negative effect. So with that, we can try to see what we have in terms of our answer section, in terms of the negative effects that we can have in terms of migration. Overpopulation is the first one, which is a lack of services, which leads to lack of services and shortage of essential goods. So then, why do people migrate to urban areas? They may be searching for better economic opportunities, the job opportunities, or also better livelihoods. So this is what we have. Then 3.3.3 briefly describe the concept urban migration. It is a movement of people from rural areas to urban areas, as indicated. And then we'll go to 3.3.4. How will the net migration influence the South African economy? So it leads to densely populated informal settlements, and uncontrolled migration leads to service delivery problems also. That is what we have. So we are going to notice a suffocation of the service delivery systems. So that is what we have. Then 3.3.5, why is it important for the government to know the population growth rate in the country? The increase in the population in cities increases labor, which is needed in industries. Those are some of the points that we can include in terms of that. Then on 3.4, briefly discuss the Labor Court of South Africa in dispute resolution. The Labor Court grants interdicts. The Labor Court awards compensation in any circumstances which are mentioned in the Labor Relations Act. The Labor Court makes orders for costs which need to be paid. So that's what we have for 3.4. So moving on to the next part, which is our 3.5. How does Stokvel contribute towards a better form of savings for members? These are the points that we have within the context of our Stokvels. Stokvels are area savings or investment society to which members regularly contribute an agreed amount and from which they receive a lump sum payment. Stokvels are sociable. Members have common values and understand one another. So those are some of the positives that we can deduce from Stokvels. And this becomes the last part that we have in terms of question 3. And of course, we need to move on to the essay part, which is now question 4. Well, on our question 4, that is our essay question, it reads, discuss in detail the industrial development, which yes, 26 marks. The additional part, how was surplus production, trade and transport development used in the evolution of markets? So that is our additional part with 10 marks. So in terms of our introduction, remember we are supposed to define any key term that you can see in the question. That is the best way to come up with your introduction. So we have industrial development in our question that we can define as a keyword. So in terms of industrial development, it refers to a development that involves a manufacturing or industrial process, and also industrial development is the building and growing of industries within an economy by using new technologies, which makes jobs easier, faster, and better, and lead to an increase in business output and increase in profits. So in terms of the main part now, we are now going to look at the main part by discussing in detail the industrial development. So industrial development, we can start by explaining it or describing it from the point of view of manufacturing. So these are the explanations that we have on manufacturing, whereby we are saying the processes change from an agrarian and handicraft economy to one dominated by industry and machine manufacturing. So these are points that are here that I'm explaining about manufacturing as we go down, that we can include in our essay. Then after that, we are supposed to go to technological progress, the mobilization of energy and mechanization of production. So we are still on the part of discussing in detail the industrial development. So we are now on technological progress and the mobilization of the energy and the mechanization of production, whereby we look at transportation improved, communication improved. We look at the next part, we have got banking improved. And then we've got the part of urbanization and migration. We look at urbanization, look at migration as part of industrial development. We also look at modern day migration, refugees and displaced people, mass migration. We move on in terms of the next part. We have got also the next, which is part B. So we have got a continuation of a description of industrial development, as we have classified into different sections. And then we look at the last part now is going to be your conclusion. Since this one essay, you can end up with a conclusion. So this is a typical conclusion that you can come up with according to this essay that we are looking at. On our second essay, it reads and discuss in detail the South African labor force with 26 marks, which is going to be the main part. And then on the second part, which is the additional part, discuss national growth with regard to the difference between birth and death rates of a population. This is now the additional part. So the typical introduction that we can come up with, we have it here as the typical introduction according to our essay. And then from there, you're supposed to go to the main part where you have to discuss in detail the South African labor force. So in terms of the describing the South African labor force, you are going to start on, you can start on age composition, which we have a description of age composition, which represents labor force between the ages of 15 and 65. There were further points that I explained on that. Then you can move on to explain on labor force numbers, which includes the employment and the unemployment. So the employed and the unemployed. Explanations also we have on that part. And then we have got the geographic composition. And finally, we end with your additional part. Remember, the additional part, you have to discuss national growth with regard to the difference between the birth and death rates of a population. So so national growth basically is the difference between birth and death rates in the population, birth and death rate of the population during a specific period of time. So These are the points that we have within that context. And then finally, you end with your conclusion. So this is what we have according to this video. Thank you for listening, and we'll meet again in the next video.